We're going to close the 7th chapter of Bava. And unlike the other chapters, which has dealt with basically civil damages, this one deals with criminality. It's dealt with theft. It's dealt with a thief, a brazen thief, an egregious thief who has to pay back 4 or 5 times what he stole. I'm going to close with, well, the last Mishnah in the chapter is always very significant. We'll see that it closes on an act of extreme thievery, but on its way there, it's going to circle by a number of different topics, all of which actually relate to normal damages. So we'll go back to damages, but we will end up with crime. Ein megadlin behemat akah be'eretz Yisrael. It's not permitted. It's forbidden. We don't rear small cattle in the land of Israel. Small cattle are basically sheep and goats. We don't rear sheep and goats in the land of Israel. Megadlin b'Suria uv'midbarot shebe'eretz Yisrael. We do rear them in Syria or in the wilderness of the land of Israel. So we can rear them out in the desert. Out in the desert, you can rear goats, but apparently not in the center of the land. And this seems very puzzling at first sight. But then remember that we're dealing with damages. And one of the characteristics of sheep and goats is that they basically go anywhere and they eat anything. They eat anything. And if we're trying to encourage agriculture as a society, having sheep and goats running around who will basically eat up any shoot which springs up above the earth, it's corrosive to it's destructive to the agricultural society. And that seems to be why the Mishnah says, look, in the land of Israel, you can't rear sheep and goats except in the desert, where obviously nothing else will grow. Along the same lines, Ein megadlim tarnagolim b'Yerushalayim. We don't rear chickens in Jerusalem. Mipnei hakodashim, because of the holy things. There's some anxiety, just like the sheep and the goats are running around eating any shoots which grow. Chickens, well, we know what chickens do. They peck. Chickens are pecking all over the place, and we're anxious that they're going to peck some piece of meat or of maybe dead reptile, which is tameh, which is impure, and they're going to drop it on top of something which is pure. In Jerusalem, we're always careful about the ritual purity, the tahara of food or of objects that might be used in the temple. So we're not going to have chickens in Jerusalem. If we eat chicken, we're going to have to slaughter it outside and bring it in. And we're going to go further. Velo kohanim be'eretz Yisrael mipnei hatarot. And priests in the land of Israel don't rear chickens because they're worried about taharot, about purity. If you've got a chicken in your yard, you're always worried about kind of where it's been, where it's going to go, and where it's going to drop something. And then along the same lines, Lo yegadel Yisrael chazirim b'chol makom. A Jew should not rear pigs anywhere. We are nowhere allowed to rear pigs. And this seems very odd at first sight because, okay, we know pigs are not kosher animals, but we can rear other non-kosher animals. We can rear camels, we can rear rabbits. So why can't we rear pigs? Well, let's just hold that in our minds and let's just study the rest of the Mishnah. A person shouldn't raise a dog. Really interesting, because anybody who's met survivors of the Shoah knows that they don't like dogs. Anyone who's met a survivor knows they don't like dogs. And here in the Mishnah, Lo Yegadel Adam et HaKelev. And there's a story actually in the Talmud about a dog that barked at a woman as she was coming into a bakehouse to bake bread. And she was very shocked. And well, according to the story in the Talmud, she was pregnant, her pregnancy miscarried. And the Mishnah goes on to say, Ela imken haya kashur shal shelet. Unless it's tied with a chain. Shal shelet is the Hebrew for chain. We don't rear dogs unless they're tied with a chain. Ein porsin nishba'in leyonim, and we don't set traps for doves. Ela imken haya rachok min hayishuv shloshim rus. We don't set traps for pigeons unless they're 30 rus. I think that's about 8,000 amot, about 4 kilometers from an inhabited place. People rear doves for food, and if we just set a trap for a dove, we're always anxious that we might trap a dove that's the legitimate property of someone who lives in town. So we only set dove traps way outside of town, where we assume that doves flying around are wild doves in a fair game, so to speak, to be trapped. So we can understand all of these prohibitions. But what about the pigs? Lo yigadal Yisrael chazerim b'chol makom. A Jew shouldn't rear pigs anywhere. This is not even in the land of Israel. This is anywhere at all. A Jew shouldn't rear pigs. And I remember actually one of my school friends, the parents of one of my school friends did have a farm, and I think they did rear pigs during the war. Anyway, the Gemara is going to explain. Ein megadlin chazerim b'chol makom. We don't raise pigs anywhere. That's the quote from the Mishnah. And then now the Gemara is going to explain it. Tanu Rabbanan, our teachers have taught. This is related to Hanukkah, by the way. So it's maybe it's significant to come across this Baraita and to teach it just a couple of days after the last day of Hanukkah. When the families of the Hasmoneans were at war with one another. So the Hasmoneans started off fighting the Greeks, but they ended up fighting one another. There was Hyrcanus and there was Aristobulus. And on this occasion, Hyrcanus mi bifnim, Aristobulus mi bachutz. Hyrcanus was inside and Aristobulus outside, two brothers leading different factions. Uv'chol yom hayu mishal shalim. Every day they would mishal shalim. It's the same word as for chain. A chain. Remember, we said a chain is a shalshelet. Mishal shalim means to chain down, to lower down. They send down in a chain. V'chol yom hayu mishal shalim lahem b'kupa dinarin. So they lower down, they chain down these dinars in a box. V'hayu ma'alim lahem tamidim. And they would send up the daily offerings. So even though these two brothers are fighting, they are still cooperating in keeping the daily sacrifices in the temple. Jerusalem's under siege, but they're sending money out to buy the daily sacrifice, and they're sending the sacrifice in. The live animal. Okay, so they're still cooperating. There was some old guy there who was familiar with Greek wisdom. Greek wisdom. This is what we're fighting. Greek wisdom. Amar lahem kol zman she'oskin ba'avodah ein nimsarim b'yedchem. As long as they occupy themselves with the avodah, with the divine service, ein nimsarim b'yedchem, they will not be delivered into your hands. Really interesting. As long as they continue, and we can read this different ways, as long as they cooperate in performing the divine service, Jerusalem is not going to fall. L'macha shilshu dinarim b'kupa v'helu lahem chazir. The next day, they chained down, they lowered down the money in the box, and they sent up a pig. Rather than sending up the 2 lambs for the tamidim, for the daily sacrifice, they sent up a pig. What is going to happen? when it got halfway up, so it's not quite in the town yet. It's halfway up. We've said, by the way, in the Mishnah, the various things we don't let into Jerusalem. We only even let a chicken into Jerusalem because we're worried about it's going to pick up something unholy and drop it somewhere else. And here we got this whole pig coming up, and it's halfway in. It's stuck its hooves into the wall, or tzipor or it's hooves. Now, one of the things that it's in Bereshit Rabbah, actually. The thing about the pig is that it does have a cleft hoof. It has a cleft hoof. So it looks kosher if you just look at its hoof. It's not kosher. It doesn't chew the cud. But it looks kosher if you just look at its hooves. And when it lies down, by the way, it stretches its hooves out in front of it. So it makes you think it's kosher. So here's this pig, right? This Greek pig. And it's stretched out its kosher bit into the wall. It's touched the wall. It's as if it's saying, look, I want to get into Jerusalem. I'm kosher. Let me in, let me in. But he's not kosher. V'nizda'azah Eretz Yisrael arba me'ot parsa al arba me'ot parsa. And the land of Israel quaked. There was an earthquake for 400, an area of 400 parsangs. As he stuck its non-kosher hooves into the wall, the land of Israel quaked. B'ota sha'a amaru. At that time they said, Arur ha'ish sheyigadel chazirim. Cursed is the person who raises pigs. Ve'arur ha'adam sheyilamed et beno chochmat Yavanit. And cursed is the man who teaches his son Greek wisdom. Now, of course, we do teach Greek wisdom today. And I think wisdom is a two-edged sword. It depends how you use it. And Maimonides, of course, uses Greek wisdom. So we do teach Greek wisdom today, but we still don't raise pigs, even outside the land of Israel.